Hello, my beautiful watchers. I think I'm on strike. Sort of. If you're not aware, the Screen Actors Guild has joined the Writers on Strike, and they've put out some semi-official statements regarding influencers and content creators. I'm probably not the best person to explain all of the details, but there is a lot of content out there that does if you want to know more about the strike. What I do on this channel seems to be in a bit of a grey area because it could be considered a recommendation for the films that I'm comparing to books, and while I'm not in SAG and I don't have any particular aspirations to be, I just don't want to be on the wrong side of this fight. I fully support the very reasonable demands of the Writers and Actors Guilds. So this episode and the following one are things that I wrote and filmed before SAG put out their statement, which, if I'm understanding the wording, is still okay, but if the strike is still ongoing next month, I will be forced to confine myself to book-related content only, no adaptations for a bit. Thanks for your understanding. On with the show. Ladies and gentlemen, and my non-binary compatriots, I have gathered you here today because there has been a murder most foul. The deceased, as you know, is the murder on the Orient Express. Possibly is the most popular murder mystery novel in the world by the legendary Agatha Cristie. And the murderer is Monsieur Kenneth Brannah, and I, Dominic Noble, shall reveal the method he used to kill it. You may run the little opening sequence now if you wish, Reginald. Hello my beautiful watchers, and welcome to Lost in Adaptation, the internet review show dedicated to comparing the plot and themes of film adaptations to the books they're based on. It's kind of amazing that I've not covered anything Dame Agatha Cristie related on this channel until now, seeing as she is the highest selling novelist of all time, and not only that, her books have sold better than the next 4 runners-up on that list combined. I also have mad respect for her as a person. The last time I visited Britain, I attended a lecture as part of a book launch about her, and her consistent inability to remain confined to the role expected of her gender in her time period, and how she probably faked a disappearance and a bout of amnesia in order to get away from it all and go to a spa after her first husband turned out to be a complete smeghead. It is very much worth a read if you're interested. A cornerstone of her early success was the long-running series of murder mystery novels starring Belgian gentleman detective Hercule Poirot. Starting in 1920, Dame Agatha wrote Poirot into 51 short stories, 33 novels, and 2 plays. Slightly amusingly, she allegedly became increasingly annoyed over the years with her own character for his bombastic, egocentric behavior, but out of a sense of duty to the fans who adored him, she resisted the urge to kill him off or change his behavior until 1975, just 1 year before her own death. She did, however, allow herself a break from writing a character she detested by starting a second series of novels in 1932, this time starring Miss Marple, an all-round more agreeable person. Fun fact, because each of the novels was relatively contemporary to the time of their publishing, Poirot somehow remained a middle to old age man for the better part of 60 years. Poirot has enjoyed adaptations in almost every form of media, including stage, television, anime, believe it or not, radio, and of course film. One of the most popular interpretations was a British TV show starring David Suchet that ran for an impressive 13 seasons between 1989 and 2013. But today I'm taking a look at the most recent adaptations, co-produced, directed, and starring Kenneth Brannah. Sir Kenneth Charles Brannah is undeniably an accomplished actor and director. In addition to his knighthood, he's earned an Oscar, 4 BAFTAs, 2 Emmys, a Golden Globe, and an Olivia Award. He has, however, earned a bit of a reputation of late as being someone who you should probably not trust with a film adaptation of a beloved franchise. You poor boy. You deserved so much better. The movie was co-produced by Ridley Scott, written by Michael Green, and cast with an impressive list of Hollywood up-and-comers and alumni, including Tom Bateman, Penelope Cruz, Willem Dafoe, Judi Dench, Johnny Depp, Josh Gad, Leslie Odom Jr., Michelle Pfeiffer, and fresh out of Star Wars, Daisy Ridley. The movie's reception was mixed, with fans of Agatha Cristie often leading the charge to condemn it for numerous reasons. I'm going to confess something to you now, my beautiful watchers, and I can only hope your opinion of me isn't drastically affected by it. You know how everyone has a guilty pleasure, something they objectively know is worthy of all the criticism it receives, but cannot help but enjoy regardless? Well, this film and its sequel are mine. I did a whole Patreon exclusive video desperately trying to justify this, but the TLDR is there's just something weirdly comforting about them for me personally, and it's made me way more forgiving than most bibliophiles towards them and the common, and let's face it, often bizarre deviations from Dame Agatha's books. That said, I promise I will not let that hold me back in this review. When this film goes off the rails, see what I did there, I will call it on it. Let's talk adaptation. Hercule Poirot receiving a telegram while travelling through Istanbul, informing him there's been a big break in a case that he was working on in Britain, requiring him to return there post-haste. By lucky chance running into Book, a good friend of his who works for the railroad company, and promises to get him a berth on the Orient Express, the train that would carry him to his goal most efficiently. Book being surprised that the train is already fully booked, as it very rarely is that time of year, but managing to negotiate a compartment for his friend by evicting a latecomer. Poirot discovering that he's sharing the train with about a dozen other passengers: a butler, a governess, a princess, a missionary, an assistant, a maid, a professor, a count and countess, a widow, a salesman, and a doctor. Obviously they all have names, but cards on the table, I never bothered learning them because honestly I think the archetype they embody is significantly more integral to the story, so I tend to just refer to them as such when I talk about it. A rough-looking American businessman named Ratchet approaching Poirot not long into the journey and attempting to bribe him into taking a job as his protector, as he's gotten on the wrong side of some shady gangsters and suspects his life is in danger. Poirot turning him down flat because he's already measured him up and decided he's no good, and because he just doesn't like his face. The train being forced to halt midway through the journey due to snowdrift, and the discovery of Ratchet's very stabbed body. Poirot agreeing to figure out which of the other passengers killed him at Book's behest. The multiple stab wounds presenting an unusual inconsistency, with some being clearly powerful, some weak, some left-handed, and some right-handed. Poirot immediately seeing through the seemingly generous charcuterie of clues that was left for him, which included a woman's handkerchief, a man's pipe cleaner, a button, and a broken watch for the smokescreen it was, and zeroing in on the only real clue in the room, an almost completely burned death threat that revealed to him that the deceased was a famous kidnapper called Cristie, known for taking the money and killing the child regardless, whose past victims had included a child named Daisy Armstrong. As a result of her death, her mother went into premature labor and died, and her father, a popular World War I veteran, suicided by gunshot. Because Cristie vanished immediately after committing the crime, the family maid had been accused of the deed and had jumped from a window in grief and shame right before she was proved innocent. Poirot interviewing each suspect individually and slowly proving that each and every one of them had a very personal connection to the tragic Armstrong family, using a combination of questions, observations of small details about their person or their luggage, logical deduction, and verbally tripping them regarding their prepared stories. This of course making the case more confusing because they all have equally strong motives to kill Cristie. Poirot eventually concluding there were two possible explanations for the murder: that one of the many crime organizations Cristie had crossed over the years had sent an assassin to kill him, who then escaped the train before the murder was discovered, or all of the suspects had orchestrated a conspiracy to track down and avenge themselves on the child murderer. Despite successfully eliciting confessions from basically all of the accused, Poirot eventually sticking with the first, simpler solution because of the extreme nature of the deceased's crimes and the sympathy he felt for his executioners. While the script is rarely word for word true to the book when long conversations take place, one-liners, mostly from the suspects, were occasionally direct quotes. I also have to appreciate that they made a special effort to stick to the exact method of the murder, drugging Cristie so each conspirator could take a single stab at him. We're treated to the tail end of a completely unrelated case that Poirot is wrapping up at the start of the film, establishing his genius and his methods in lieu of the multiple books that came before this one. The film sports a significantly more diverse cast than the book, and they integrated this change surprisingly well, e.g. they did not simply switch out a white man for a black man in a story revolving around the wealthy elite of 1934 and pretend like everyone would have treated him exactly the same way. It's actually a plot point. Poirot is convinced to take the case when Book astutely points out that if the police arrive and there's no clear solution to the mystery, they would absolutely just arrest the black guy and call it a day. There are a few other liberties taken with the suspects. Some have different fake backstories or different real backstories or a slightly different connection to the Armstrong family, but, and I don't know if this is going to be a controversial opinion or not, I don't personally think this is a big deal. The only things that they absolutely had to be to hold to the core of the original story was, at first glance, completely disconnected from the victim and each other, but slowly revealed to be an incredibly close team united by the tragedy of the Armstrong family. Whether one person is Swedish or Spanish, or another guy's cover story now involves pretending to be a racist German, doesn't really interfere with the plot beats all that much. There's only really two changes that I, in my majestic benevolence, consider worthy of note. One is that they decided to make the Count some sort of kung fu ballet dancer with rage issues. Like, what? That's so random! The other involves the Doctor, because they combined two characters into one for the film. In the book, one of the head conspirators was a British colonel, and the Doctor was the only other person besides Book who wasn't part of the murder team. Now the Doctor is one of the killers, and I guess we just have to assume he decided he couldn't risk playing down the irregularities of the stab wounds to Poirot in case he recognized them himself. Oh, and speaking of Book, now there's a character that's so far off the mark I'm honestly a little in awe of the writer's thought process. I mean, I'm just struggling to imagine who could read about director Book, a middle-aged, Belgium respectable railroad company exec, and think, okay, but what if he was A, British, and B, basically Charlie Sheen circa 2011? I believe the idea is the man you see in the film is the book in the book. The original guy from the novel's rambunctious nephew. Now, Poirot has been known to have younger friends tailing him on his adventures. There's a recurring character called Hastings, for example, who pops up occasionally and even narrates some of the stories, but this immature, horny layabout makes for a much more dramatic contrast to his dignified gentleman detective acquaintance. I feel I should apologize to everyone hoping that I would be full of righteous indignance towards these films, but I personally found this unlikely friendship kind of endearing. To be fair though, this character does outstay his welcome, shall we say, in this film series, but we will come to that. Right now, let's talk about the main man himself, Hercule Poirot, the greatest detective on Earth. Oh boy, where to start? Physically, Brannah isn't exactly perfect for the role. Poirot is consistently described as an extremely funny-looking little man, very short with a head that's almost perfectly egg-shaped and an exceptionally neat mustache. Now, Brannah can't help being handsome, but what is going on with that mustache? It takes up most of the man's face. He's got a mustache growing out of his mustache. The book does occasionally describe his facial hair as mustaches, plural, but that's just an old-fashioned way of saying it. It's not literally multiple mustaches. However, his excessive soup stopper isn't the deviation from the book character that offended Agatha Cristie fans are most likely to bring up when they condemn these films. That honor goes to his participation in brief but intense action scenes that occur throughout. I have not read every Poirot book, but in all that I've read, I'm yet to see a single instance of Poirot so much as breaking into a brisk walk, let alone a run, and he only ever touches weapons to check them for clues. According to Cristie herself, Poirot was originally intended as a subversion of the action hero detective, a man who would fight crime exclusively with his brain, not his brawn. It is antithetical to the concept of his character to have him chasing suspects down perilous mountain bridges and wrestling for guns on the edge of cliffs. This is a change that even I, an admitted apologist for these films, cannot defend. It's just so un-Poirot-like, and it's not necessary for the story at all. Another thing that often comes up when people discuss the interpretation of this character is just how much they ran with the idea that he's neurodiverse. I keep saying in videos that I don't like armchair diagnosing people, but I always seem to get dragged into it. I mean, I don't know, I didn't personally pick up on Poirot having OCD in the novels, and when he was rude to someone, it was usually part of a deliberate ploy to throw them off their balance, as opposed to an unknowing lack of social graces. I can confidently say that whatever obsessive-compulsive tics he might have had were not played up anywhere near as much as they were in the film, in which Poirot can't even eat breakfast unless his 2 eggs are perfectly identical, and he has to smear his other shoe in excrement if he steps in it. Unlike the before-mentioned action sequences, the general beef with this change isn't that it's completely detrimental to Poirot as a character, but simply that, like so many other portrayals of mental health in fiction, it's constantly played for laughs. In addition to this, Brannah and the writers also made the conscious decision to take Poirot's occasional moments of ego and make that his whole personality. Don't get me wrong, there are multiple occasions in the books where he proves he has a very high opinion of himself and his abilities, but The dude literally compares himself to God in this flick. They also apparently decided that Poirot needed to be haunted by a tragic past, so they crowbarred in a dead lover for him to think about sadly during slow moments. I don't know if I'm doing a good enough job of imparting just how much these things affect the tone of the film. Poirot's idiosyncrasies make up most of the humor, and they do their best to link his tragic grief-ridden past to him trying to solve this case as much as possible. He's also given a small but important personal stake in the case that was entirely absent in the book. As soon as he learns the Cristie connection, he reveals to Book that Captain Armstrong, the poor child's father, had written to him asking for help, but had succumbed to grief and ended his own life before the letter could reach him. So, this investigation represented a chance for Poirot to fulfill a dead hero's last request. The film also hypes up things like the avalanche that stopped the train. Originally, it had fallen on the track sometime before the Orient Express's arrival, forcing it to stop while it was being cleared. Now it appears to be the perfect timing of a vengeful mountain god, because it crashes down at the exact moment the train is passing, violently slamming into it and derailing the engine entirely. It also happens to strand everyone on a rickety-ass bridge in the film, providing the convenient vertical action set for Poirot to chase suspects or fight for guns on. Here's an interesting one. In the book, Poirot wasn't technically the guy who made the call to let everyone off the hook. He simply presented the two possible solutions the police would accept and left the choice to Book and the Doctor, who both immediately agreed the imaginary gangster was the killer. Apparently not content with such an offhand approach, Film Poirot orchestrates a final test on the stab-happy passengers to see if their willingness to kill extends past righteous vengeance to self-preservation, giving them a gun and telling them the only way they'll get away with their crime is if they shoot him. Daisy's grandmother passes the test by attempting to take the full blame and using the secretly unloaded firearm on herself instead, so Poirot informs the Bobbies of the option 1 scenario. The film lingers on past where the book ended, enough to see him parting ways with the train and to name-drop Death on the Nile as a possible sequel, which was fun, but even at the time made me question if they'd read that book in advance, because the plot required Poirot to already be in Egypt when that death took place. But again, we'll come to that. Final thoughts. Okay, I promise my commitment to an honest critique of this film is still in effect, but I do need to run through a few justifications for some of the decisions made. Consider this. One of the biggest draws of Cristie's work is the twists. What she's really good at is messing with your expectations regarding the killer and their methods. Now, the problem with this, adaptation-wise, is Murder on the Orient Express has probably the most commonly known ending in all murder mysteries in all of fiction. It's a whodunit where everyone knows who done it. Everyone done it. Brannah and Green would have been idiots to think they could rely on the same surprise value that made the book popular, and they didn't. They added more humor, more personal drama, and more spectacle to make up for the fact that the film's intended fanbase already knew how the story was going to end. And, as I said earlier, with the exception of whatever the heck they were doing with Count Spinkick, there really wasn't much harm done by playing a little fast and loose with the backstories of these suspects while keeping to the core of their characters and their connection to the crime. So, why was this movie so unpopular with the fans that it can be considered a murder by Monsieur Brannah? The plot was relatively on track, the changes to most of the ensemble were not egregious, the murder of Cristie went off exactly as it was described in the book. What was the metaphorical weapon used to kill Poirot? Well, it's bloody Poirot, isn't it? It all comes down to Poirot himself. It's 9-inch wide mustache within a mustache sporting, neurodiversity played for laughs, constantly shouting, Josh Gad chasing, can take a bullet in the arm and keep on investigating, ending every case by holding a gun on a room full of people, all-round action hero, Kenneth Brannah, Hercule Poirot. Agatha Cristie herself knew that she couldn't mess with what made Poirot Poirot to her fans, because when you turn him into something he's not, you lose something quintessential about what made the book special. As much as I personally enjoy these films, That's Not Poirot is a very legitimate complaint to make about them, and I don't know, he's kind of important to the series. So yes, saying that Kenneth Brannah murdered this film is possibly a little harsh, but it was very useful for the purposes of this sketch, and I'm sticking with it, because of course it was a double murder. Monsieur Brannah struck again. So, do join me next time when I continue my investigation into his crime and take a look at Death on the Nile. In the meantime, please don't forget that all YouTube channels rely on a healthy supply of likes, comments, and new subscribers to keep the horrors of the unforgiving algorithm at bay, and do take care of yourselves out there. Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Holtz, April Mack, and Curtis Charles Jr. Shout out to Ilnej for the credits music, check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's editor, Sophia Ricciardi. Links to her work in the video description. Fuck me. Getting dizzy. So Terry, I'm warning you. Hey. In 1989 and 2003. 13, damn it.